Hi, everybody. Welcome to Coffee Chats. We are your hosts. I'm Mackenzie Finkley.
And I'm Kyra Ann Dawkins. And today we have the pleasure of hosting our inaugural Coffee Chats. And we'll be talking about the importance of harnessing the power of community and how to best do that as authors. So we're so excited to have our panelists for today. First, we'd like to bring on the illustrious Nicole Bianchi.
Hi, Nicole. How are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you both?
Doing well. Good for a Thursday afternoon. Nice to have this coffee break and chat with you a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, so Nicole, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, so I'm Nicole Bianchi. I'm an author, recent author. As of last May, I authored the book Small Brave Moves, Learn Why Little Acts of Bravery Are the Key to Life-Changing Leadership. I started a consulting business about 10 years ago called Bravium, and we partner with companies all over the world in strategy, leadership development, coaching, and then building team alignment as well. And before that, I worked at a couple of Fortune 500 companies in roles that allowed me to really lead transformation, which was a ton of fun.
We're excited to talk to you about community today. So first question that I would love to ask you is, how do you maintain your audience engagement?
Investing time each week into pouring myself into that. And I think that looks a couple different ways for me. One, I really love to use the platform LinkedIn. I think it's a great way to weigh in and cheer people on and build relationships, as well as post meaningful content that you think can benefit others. I also do that through a newsletter that I have found. So anytime I have some exciting news, I always try to unveil it to, through my newsletter and stuff first before I put it out on social media, so they feel like they're getting the sneak peek and information that way. But I find that there's probably when I'm at my best maintaining audience and growing it, I'm investing time in it, a little bit of time each day. And I'm being really planful about scheduling things out, but also sprinkling in kind of in the moment opportunities to share things.
So you mentioned that you have a newsletter. I kind of want to ask the follow-up question. Where does your audience primarily live?
Oh gosh, they're all over the world, but I would say primarily the United States. They're kind of all over, is what I would tell you. They are definitely all over. What's interesting about the work I do is through Bravium is it takes me to different places. And so I have, when I think about audiences, I have kind of my client audiences. I have the people that have supported me along the author journey, which is a mixture of clients, past colleagues, friends, family. So I kind of have these buckets, which I know is going to lead into another question that you'll have here in a little bit. So I think about it that way.
Thank you. Absolutely. So we do have another panelist that has now joined the chat. Michael.
Hello. Hi. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We love that you're here.
Absolutely.
So tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Hello. My name is Michael Dumlao. I am the proud author of The Wisdom of Guncles, that there in the back. It published about 2 months ago, and I literally just got back from a national book tour where I toured 15 cities, held about 18 different events across 4 time zones. So a little tired.
Yeah.
And on top of that, I also did about 3 virtual keynotes with Microsoft, Genentech, and with Out Youth in Austin. And then did actually 4 podcast interviews while I was out there. So quite a busy bee, but really, really proud of how productive I was able to be despite everything that was happening, and really able to activate a network that I've been cultivating for 20 years. I'm really proud of nothing else. I've been able to prove that, networking works and that I was able to activate it in such a very real, authentic, meaningful way. And I guess that's one of the things that we wanted to talk about today.
Yes, that is very much what we want to talk about today. So we were just asking Nicole the question, how do you maintain your audience engagement? And then we also asked Nicole, where does your audience live?
Mm-hmm. So for me, my audience is very, very global. So I was born in the Philippines. I still have a lot of family and friends in the Philippines. And then because of the dictatorship that we all left, a lot of us got dispersed. So I ended up moving to Australia. But a lot of my other family members moved to the UK, moved to Dubai, moved to other parts of Europe. And so that's why I've actually found a lot of my readers have also sort of been nestled in those areas. I then moved to California, and then I also have relatives now in Texas. And then, of course, I've been living here in Washington, D.C. for 21 years. And professionally, my network is between D.C., New York, San Francisco, now parts of Austin. And then globally, because of the global reach of some of my past work, mostly in the UK, in Sydney, and certainly in Manila. So I've been able to mirror a lot of my familial network with my professional network, and of course also my social network. One thing you can say about the LGBTQ community is that we are far-flung, deeply rooted where we are, and we are very loyal to each other. So I've been able to activate the queer network in a really, really beautiful way with this incredibly unapologetically queer book. And I think that in of itself has also helped me sort of activate and engage and continue to engage in a really, really authentic way these incredibly far-flung networks that I've been able to activate for not just my pre-sale, but also with my sales, with my podcast interviews. I've been able, one of the most heartwarming thing for me is that a lot of my podcast interviews are back home in the Philippines. So I've been able to do them bilingually, trilingually when I've needed to. And at the end of the day, you know, that's where I feel like a lot of my impact can be made. I've also had a lot of interviews with folks back home in Sydney, folks in California, across the Commonwealth. And so that also has allowed me to engage in that sort of way. And all through just very active engagement, active following, active listening, and very proactive outreach through colleagues that I have worked with for a long time, with family members that I've kept in touch with, and really just maintaining a very consistent content strategy and consistent content presence in all of my social media, and making sure that people know that this is still a thing, it's still alive, and that I am actively engaging them. And also being very, very vocal about like the stage gates, the fact that there's a hardcover coming out, there's an audiobook coming out. I very much was very active on social throughout my national tour. That was a great way for me to promote the book, promote me, promote the tour itself. And that I think helped to really snowball in many, many ways, different kinds of connections. I mean, people found me just because people were talking about me and sharing my content and sharing the fact that I was on tour. As soon as people heard, oh, he's on tour, it's like suddenly became we got to go catch him. If we can't catch him, we should interview him. So it was good era. It was good sort of very targeted PR and targeted personal connections that then just kept rolling into other opportunities that I didn't anticipate.
So are you keeping track of them all in a newsletter, or is there a particular social media platform you find yourself on the most?
I've been doing a lot of mostly Facebook and Instagram. Facebook, just because I've cultivated that network and I'm getting close to 5,000. I'm thinking about to hit the limit, which is really good. And with Instagram, it's just a great way for me to engage people who I'm not directly connected to. LinkedIn, I'm very specific about what I'm doing with LinkedIn. It's really a space for me to talk about my corporate outreach, my corporate speaking engagements, because I think for me that's just what makes the most amount of sense. But really, it's been a lot of Facebook and Instagram, and then podcasts. The podcast service circuit has been really, really good for me. I think to date now I've done 22 podcast interviews. It started off with me signing on to matchmaker.fm, which was a really, really good way for me to connect with relevant podcasters. And I'm now a featured speaker because other podcasters have recommended me to other podcasters. And now, literally out of the woodwork, I get 1 or 2 requests a day at this point in terms of, hey, can you be on my podcast? Can you get on my podcast? So that's been really, really good for me as well, because it's expanded my readership, my brand reach, but also really, frankly, exposed my content and my book to people that I never expected. Like, for example, when I was right before my book event on Melrose Avenue, I got hit up by a podcaster based out of Hollywood that exclusively did sports and hip hop content, exclusively. But then he found me off of another podcast, got my book, read my book, and said, "Oh my gosh, I need to have you on my show." And I became his first queer person and his first author. So I was neither an athlete nor an aspiring hip hop producer. And so that was interesting for him. It was interesting for his readers, but I think for him, he was able to, really, really dig into my stories and how relevant it was for him. And so that also, I think, expanded my readership to his audience, which is absolutely not the readership I expected. I mean, like, I suddenly am being followed by LA Laker cheerleaders. So that's great. I'll take that.
I'd love to add another panelist to our stream here. We've got Colette Tracy.
Hey guys, how are you?
Doing great. How are you doing today, Colette?
Doing good, thank you.
We would love for you to introduce yourself to the audience.
Okay, my name is Colette Tracy, and I am an author with Creators Inc. and NDP, and I'm actually, my book is going to be published in December. I'm thrilled about it. And my background has been in business development, and I have a master's in psychology, and psychology is the closest to my heart, personal development. But I found a way, with working with my book to kind of incorporate both passions. So with my skills for developing some markets for my book.
Thank you for telling us about yourself, Tracy. Colette Tracy. My goodness, you have like two first names.
All the time. No problem.
So we're talking about audience engagement, and kind of the next thing I'd love to talk about. Everyone talked a little bit about the places where their audience are and their books. Love for you guys to talk about, how do you determine what your audience wants to see or experience on these places where you're giving them content?
Do you want to go first? Oh, are you talking to me? I'm sorry, I wasn't sure. Either one of us?
Anyone, everyone.
Fire away.
All right. Well, I am in the beginning stages of all of this. And I think really what I've done so far that I'm really, really thrilled about is I have found an avenue where I can really spread the word about the book widely and resonate with potential, people who want to buy the book. I've designed a course around the book, and I know I've listened to a lot of speaker series, and a lot of authors say, design the course first and then do the book. And for me, it's the opposite. So I designed the book first, and then figured that I would take some elements out of it and put it into a course. And I think for me, just my biggest claim to fame so far with it is just that I've been able to call on universities. And I did that and started out that way because I was trying to think, during the crowdsourcing part of the book, or, marketing part of the book, I thought, and I always think this, because I've been a lot of years in business development, where can I place this where I can get the most visibility for the book? And I was trying to think of, because it's women, Both Sides Now, Reflections for Women at Midlife. And so I started with a program at one of the colleges that I work at. They used to have a program for people 55 and over, right? Because it's midlife and beyond. And they didn't have it anymore. And then I just decided, well, maybe there's other colleges. And I just got really fortunate, really lucky, and ran into this program that is, it's national. And they have 129 universities that do this program. It's called ALI, or Asher Lifelong Learning Institute. And when I came to them, just immediately they loved the idea, because they have the continuing education programs, and they have a lot of women, and they haven't really done a lot, necessarily just for the women. So that's pretty much the extent. As far as, everything else, I would love to listen to this young lady here talking about how she does that. So.
Thanks, Colette. I would tell you that this has been an interesting balance for me, because I tend to be very, it's hard for me to share things about, because I feel like it comes off as braggish sometimes, like, oh, hey, we're doing this. And so I approach it from what problem am I trying to solve for my readers? And how can I do that in some quick content and engaging with them, right? And aligning some potential solutions out of the book. So I think that's something that I really think about when I'm preparing content and putting it together or getting ready to do a post. What problem am I trying to solve for them that could be helpful for them? So what best serves them right now? And that opens up so many possibilities and alleviates a little bit of that, imposter syndrome that sometimes we have going on around, okay, what is it? And trying to think of how we want to frame things. And I find that the reactions, the views, the interaction goes up pretty significantly when I keep that lens on.
So I actually did a very similar approach to Colette in the sense that I also turned my book into a corporate workshop. But the interesting thing is I think I may have inadvertently started with 20 plus years of working as a marketing executive, working in diversity, equity, inclusion strategy, and inadvertently using a lot of what I have been saying in my speeches for the past 20 years and using that as a filter for the creative nonfiction, autobiographical, semi-memoir-ish sort of thing that I ended up doing. So actually then taking out from those 10 stories a corporate workshop was actually relatively easy. And that's definitely actually what's helped me push a lot of book sales, but also push a lot of specifically corporate engagement and organizational engagement. And in those audiences, I definitely, lean into my, decades of, diversity, equity, inclusion strategy, brand strategy, culture strategy in corporate. Especially, given the fact that, a lot of those colleagues who invite me into those spaces are people that I have built business with or have attended panels on diversity in the workplace with. So I know what they're getting I know what they want out of me in that context. But what's interesting is that what they don't want me to just sit on is my 20 years as a corporate speaker, but instead actually lean in on the storytelling and on the very personal storytelling. So in many ways, actually, I'm literally about to do this right after this call. I'm doing another speaking engagement. I've actually been brought in more as a storyteller than a strategist, which is really interesting because so much of what I've done in my career has been around strategy. But this has really allowed me to tap into a whole new side of my persona, my way of activating change in the world, where it's really centered on story more than anything else. That's in my corporate spaces, but in my non-corporate spaces, my community spaces, it's all about spilling the tea for me. Like literally, I have now talked about my coming out experience, my first gay sexual experience. I have talked about my the traumas of immigrating twice. I have literally done some incredibly in-depth personal storytelling, which I've grown much more comfortable with because of the book. But it's been really interesting how, even in my corporate spaces, but especially outside of my corporate spaces, it's about really digging into these very, very human stories that I wrote. Which has been really fascinating because it's such a departure from like the corporate strategy world that I do, but it's really more just about basic human storytelling, very deep human storytelling, which I really enjoy doing because for me, it's a way to really, really connect with the audience. And that's what I found the audience really wants to see is they want to get to know me, they want to get to know my community, they want to get to know, my narrative and the narratives that I embody and represent. And for me, it's a responsibility that can be overwhelming sometimes, but I also see it as something that's really, it brings me joy, and it brings me, I think, a great sense of meaning to be able to do that for my community, for the people who I represent in this book, in spaces that don't often hear this. I mean, I went out with this book thinking that I was only going to talk to either queer audiences or Filipino audiences. And I would say my national tour that I just did, those audiences only comprised like maybe 50% of the people that I talked to. The other 50% were people that I never imagined would gravitate towards my book. So to the white suburban moms in San Diego who organized a whole book club for me, thank you. Or the elderly retired Jewish business owners that like really wanted to talk about like my very queer immigrant story. Like that was great. Like it was great for me to build that empathetic link. And show people a world that they hadn't really considered, like really diving deeply into. And so for me, that has been really, really awesome was that, what my audience has wanted to see is just raw authenticity, raw storytelling, and in some cases, a little bit of strategy, but strategy rooted in storytelling.
Yeah, I think that's great. Both you guys, it's wonderful. And we're all incorporating a little bit, I think, of each other too, our styles.
So What you are saying, Michael, actually leads very well into our next question, because it seems like oftentimes there is sort of an organic component of our audience is growing. But if you want to target new spaces, how do you best target potential new audience members?
That for me started with my test readers. So an audience I did not anticipate would be such fertile ground for me is high schools and high school educators. I have now spoken to 5 high schools, including last Friday. I actually did a speaking book reading at my old high school, which was a fascinatingly cathartic moment when I talked about my coming out experience in the same halls that rooted my trauma to begin with. But it was very healing. It was very healing to speak to the Gay Straight Alliance that didn't exist when I was a high school student in the high school, talking to being in the same space. It was fascinating. But I would say that educators was something I did not anticipate. But it all came from one person, one comment that was made when I was distributing my book out to test readers. And somebody said, you know what, I want to give this to my mom. She's a teacher. And I want to see what she thinks. And she read it, and she ended up becoming actually one of my beta readers because she was so into it. And she said, you know what, this needs to be you need to send this to Gay Straight Alliances, you need to send this to youth groups, to students. I think there's a lot that can be mined here for students and teachers who teach at that sort of high school to college age level. And so that's been an amazing way for me to, and first of all, I also was very strategic in making sure that I got reviews, editorial reviews, comments, endorsements from educators. And because of that, I've been able to use that in my press releases, in my outreach letters, and my emails to other high schools, and say, hey, I've been endorsed by such and such educational associations. I've been endorsed by these organizations, these teachers, these principals, and what have you. And I have photos to prove it. These adorable photos of me with the kids, right? And so I'm able to send that out. And that has just really allowed me to snowball into new opportunities. So I'm speaking in about 5 different universities this month alone, all 3 virtual, 2 in person. And I have a high school, again, another high school next week, and then a high school at the end of the month. And so it's been really cool. That was literally an audience space that I did not anticipate at all. But it once I identified it, then it became all about endorsements, recommendations, people saying, hey, he has a really, really good book. He's already spoken to this number of students from all across America. We know that there's versatility and adaptability in his content, and it resonates with this kind of audience. And so I've been able to just literally between word of mouth, recommendations through emails, and really using that now as my base. In many ways, it's now become a base audience space for me.
Does anybody else have any further thoughts on how to target potential audience building?
Well, I think, sorry about that. I think that, I think that, like everybody's saying, you really just have to find markets that, are really going to resonate. So, I mean, I think, finding, for me, the book is about women of a certain age and, how changes happen as we grow older. And, it in some ways, it's not really some things that women want to talk about because they're not used to talking about it, right? And but really, when you get them together with you in a classroom, and this has been on Zoom, I'm just finishing up my first class with Duke, and that's been amazing. But when you get them alone together and you're talking about these things, they really want to talk about these things, because the things that are in my book are just things that people don't normally talk about. We talk about sharing, my personal story is in there a lot too, but it's also like a collective, what we go through as we get older and the different changes and things. So I think it's really important to try to find audiences where, for me, that's the first thing I think of too, is what is the best audience for my product, for my brand, and then find a place where I have the most opportunity. But sometimes you have to find other avenues too. I've been wanting to do some online courses from LinkedIn, and I've been marketing on there, and I've had a couple free workshops and stuff to promote the book. But It's interesting though. I love hearing how it expands and grows. That's amazing. So kudos to you guys both. That's awesome. But yeah, I would just say, really, thinking about what message do you want to send? Why do you want to send that message? Why is it needed? Why is this important? In people's lives. And I've had women say to me, well, thanks, but no thanks. I'm really thrilled with my life. And I'll say, that's great. Then come on and tell us what your secrets are, because we all want to share and build that community around it. You know what I mean? So I think I try to find community. And that's something we've talked a lot about throughout our programs here. There was something that Eric had said about street community, right? And I'm like, what is street community? And I just started looking it up. And really, those are like organizations and people get together when they have festivals or, just community opportunities. So I think that spirals that way. You get in there and you find your people, and then it grows. It grows, like you said, to even people that you didn't even think it would resonate with. So, yeah.
Coming back to your why is absolutely vital. I think in building your community, but then it's kind of, you guys have both talked about how there are a lot of unexpected people that have joined your community. So I do want to pose the question, have you determined your ideal reader? Who are they? If you have.
Yeah, I'd be happy to kick off with that one. It was interesting when I started down this bravery journey. I had a lot of individuals, kind of mentors, people that are in my circle tell me that my topic would appeal very specifically to women leaders, that, women are the ones who struggle most with bravery. And it's interesting, my hunch in the work that I do, because I do a lot of executive coaching as well, I executive coach 70% male, 30% female. And I think it's because of the corporations and the environments I was in. I worked with predominantly males, and I can have really tough conversations and challenge and get them to think differently about things. So I had a lot of people kind of directing me down this path, and I really I kind of dug my heels in and said, no way. I really think I believe, my hunch is this could impact both. And what's so interesting is, and I'm using speaking as a tool to grow my business. And so I'm doing a lot of speaking gigs around the world. And it's interesting, the people who come up to me afterwards are, I would say 60% male, 40% female, talking about this resonated. Here's how I connected. Here's what was important. And that to me, so what's interesting about what you're saying, or what I'm thinking about right now, what's coming up for me is, I thought one thing and it's turning out to be something quite differently. And so I think, our message, although, we may think it may be targeting one area, it can be far more reaching. And so I'm beginning to think about what other audiences should I begin to build out that are struggling with, embracing uncertainty, how to be brave, how to not build bravery up to be such a big thing, and really think about those small, brave moves that they should be making. And so I just got back from Redondo Beach, California, and it was interesting. I had several people say, oh, our kids need to hear this, like get into this. So I'm interested to hear more about Michael and the school system, right? Because they're like, can you imagine if we were enabled the children to be, in the high school years to be able to make some of those small, brave moves sooner in their life and not wait for maturity and experience to kind of help build out some of those things. So I'm interested in targeting more of those. And the last thing I would just say on that is the power of the network. And I think Michael mentioned this earlier. I'll tell you, our network wants to help us. They just don't know what to do. And so ask for what you need and put the ask out there. And so when I have somebody comment like, oh my gosh, you did so great. And I was so inspired, your energy. I'm like, great. Thank you so much. Well, first, thank you. I deeply appreciate it. And if you can think of, anybody that could use this, please don't hesitate to throw my name in, right? Because referrals are such a powerful way for all of us to grow, our book sales, our speaking, our product, whatever that looks like.
Any further thoughts on the ideal reader and how that might have evolved throughout your book journey?
I can say that I literally wrote my ideal reader into my title, what I thought it was going to be. So, guncles, gay uncles, people who are either them or have them or wish they had them. Like, that was always in my head. who my ideal reader is. But actually what I discovered, while they are definitely still for whom I wrote this book and who I definitely wanted to embody this book and consume this book, but also discovered was really interesting has been parents specifically, especially parents who just want to understand their queer child. I've had several parents come up to me and say that my book has helped them better understand their LGBTQ son, daughter, or especially if they are going through a transgender journey, if they are affirming their non-binary identity. Like, my book has really helped them sort of just piece together all the different ways that they can be better allies to that person, simply because I'm documenting, paths and journeys and identities that aren't typically, published about. And so I've actually been told by several LGBTQ people, but specifically their parents, that my book has helped to mend and heal and also help create a greater understanding, for what LGBTQ people go through. And then what I've also heard from LGBTQ people is that because my book is so focused and centered around the immigrant and BIPOC experience and that intersection, that it's actually helped specifically white LGBTQ people better understand the struggles and the intersections of what BIPOC queer people have to go through. And so for me, it's the people that were, I guess, adjacent, that I always knew, like, someone's mom is going to casually, open this, or someone's going to, but the fact that they're now actively, like, actually coming, to my readings, attending, my book signings, and also just buying the book and commenting on it. It's been interesting for me to sort of switch a little bit exactly what that ideal reader is, that it's not only for the people for whom they needed to see their stories represented, but I think it was also for people who wanted to better understand those stories to either heal, mend, or just better understand relationships that they have always been challenged by.
So a common thread through a lot of what you have all shared today is that there is definitely power that exists within the network that you had at the start of your book journey and the network that is continually expanding throughout your book journey. So is there a particular opportunity that presents itself because of a community connection that you're particularly proud of?
I'll jump in. I've got one on my mind. I'll tell you, our community. So the Creators Institute community opened up a door that I didn't think possible. So I was so vigilant about listening in on the authors, right? The authors coming to speak. And so we got to hear Tiffany Haddish, who I inserted into my book. Oh, I just love her. And then Daniel Pink, another big one. And so being on a small call, right? I think there were only 10 or 15 of us with Daniel Pink, and asking these questions and listening to Eric interview him, I actually followed up with him and built a relationship starting, I think, last March or April. And guess who has early praise on the front of their book from Daniel Pink because of that on the hardcover release? So I'll tell you, it was, talk about small, brave moves. I just began to build a relationship, supporting him, commenting and just sending him notes, and then made the ask. And he was in the middle of writing his own book and said, hey, I can't right now, but if you want to follow up with me in 60 days, which worked out, the timing couldn't have been more perfect with the hardcover. And I thought, ooh, I'll do it on the hardcover release. So I followed up, gave him some space to read it, and he came back with the most amazing praise for the front of the book. So I have to tell you, that was really unexpected. And I really expected no, like it would just be like, no, sorry, I'm too busy, I can't help. And he said yes, and it's on the front. And this just released on Amazon, the hardcover, last week. So I'm really excited. I haven't even gone on social media because I don't even quite know how to say it yet, because you know what I mean? It's one of those things where you're like, how do you do this? How do you announce something like this? But you'll see something next week.
You just did.
That's true. That's true.
I've been really, very explicit about, one of the reasons why I wrote my book is because I wanted to have intellectual property that I own that I could sell to, or at least pitch to, streamers, specifically Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, but specifically Netflix. And the interesting thing is, at some point I actually got invited to a LGBTQ producer and content creator dinner in Hollywood last Monday. And through that, I got to meet some very, very cool showrunners, some very cool producers, some very cool content creators. who all bought my book, and I have meetings coming up. I've actually had several conversations with some of the streamers now because of this. So, the conversations are really interesting. It's taken some interesting twists and turns, but and actually at some point, when I went up to New York, I was hosted by a mentor of mine who is a producer on Broadway. And at some point, a playwright actually asked if I would ever consider turning the Wisdom of Guncles into the Guncle monologues or something like the vagina monologues. And so that's now been an ongoing conversation with that person about, well, maybe this could become a play, which then becomes a show, which then becomes I've always have imagined that these stories would manifest in all different kinds of methods of and practices of storytelling. So, those opportunities to meet with other creatives, other content creators, and other amazing people in the fields of storytelling and media has been really eye-opening and has definitely opened some interesting doors that I am just now starting to walk through.
Wow. You guys I'm in awe. I mean, the things that you're doing are like talking and having Daniel Pink in your part of your book, and playwriting. These are all like my dreams. So Daniel Pink happens to be one of my favorite authors, and I was on that speaker series as well. So I'm really in awe and a little jealous, just a little. But no, just kidding. That's great, both you guys.
All right. Well, one of my favorite questions I love to ask the authors that we have on this chat here is, what's been your favorite moment of your book journey so far? Because it is really only just begun for many of you, and it will continue to go for, the rest of your life if you want it. And you will also be considered newly published authors for the next 2 years. Like, you can milk that for 2 years. So curious to know what's been your favorite moment so far.
I just think so much of it, I really writing the book. I love the one-on-one relationships with the editors. I really, really liked all of my editors. And then the writing, of course. And I really even liked the fact that we had writing workshops together where we were all in Zoom and we're just writing together, because there was so much momentum in that, and the community part of it, I really, really enjoyed. And of course the speaker series, but it's all been pretty nice. I've enjoyed it. I'm not saying there hasn't been frustrations or, times that I was tired, but it's really been good.
Well, I think for me, using it as an excuse to do a national book tour, which really was also partially an excuse for me to get on a plane and actually just get out and travel a bit. That was been really meaningful. But I think definitely using the book as a very meaningful homecoming of sorts for me, to return back to a place that I hadn't lived in for 21 years and engage people that in some cases I hadn't seen in about that long. I was able to use the book to reconnect with some amazing people, but more importantly, connect with new people. I would say consistently that my favorite moments of the book journey has been connecting with students, young people, especially young LGBTQ people. I mean, I literally met a version of myself. If you can say oh, what would you say to a 16-year-old version? I met that person. I literally met this young queer Filipino immigrant person in one of my speaking engagements, and they told me that I basically wrote their story and I was basically a puddle of tears immediately as we were holding each other and telling them how proud I was of their own journey. And so for me, it was those very, very meaningful touch points that I didn't anticipate. I mean, the book in and of itself was a very emotional journey for me to write. I didn't realize that publishing it would also be so journey, and then publicizing it would also be so emotional. But it's really, I think, given me a great way to connect with a community, to reconnect with community, but specifically find I think you would ask who is this book really, really targeted for? Yes, I have all these new audiences, great, but I do appreciate the fact that I am able to, if I were to pinpoint exactly who I wanted this for, it would be someone just like me, and I think that's the end of the day. I think all authors at the end of the day, I think they fundamentally want to write something that speaks to them in a really, really emotional, deep, authentic way. And I have found in every single city that I've been to so far, I've found somebody who mirrors so much of my own experience. And I'm really hoping that the book helps lighten their path a little bit. And they've told me so that it has and it will. And so for me, it's been those very micro specific moments of one-on-one engagement that has been really, really meaningful, and hoping that it continues regardless of however this book manifests, that I continue to have those very deep one-on-one conversations with readers who discover me for the first time and who I discover for the first time.
I'm going to jump right into what you're saying, Michael. That just warms my heart. I couldn't agree more. I'll tell you, when I started off building this book, and it's all about, the intersection of bravery and leadership, it was very like, okay, here's the executive leaders I'm working with, here's research, here's stories. And I knew something was missing, and I was holding back some of my own personal stories, some really tough stories I had endured. And I was on an author call with Tiffany Haddish as a part of the Creators Institute. And I asked a question, and she said, you have to tell your story every last bit. And in that moment, like that's all I needed to hear. And I just poured myself in. And it was similar to what Michael was saying. It was such an emotional journey. There were times where, I had to make small, brave moves as a child, and then all the way through my leadership journey. And sometimes it worked well, and sometimes it didn't. Not everybody wants to hear the truth sometimes. What was interesting was I inserted one particular story that was a sexual abuse story early on. And I was really scared about it because not very many people know about it, especially my family and my circle. What was most surprising for me was individuals coming out and reaching out to me saying how that story gave them permission at the age of 40, 45, 50 years old to tell their husband, their mom, their sisters and brothers, like people who had no idea that they had been bottling this up. And I just didn't expect that. So I was nervous about it. I was nervous about what corporations would think about it being included in the book and using it, but I have received nothing but, so that for me was like the moments that one of the favorite, moments was listening to Tiffany Haddish, going with it, and then hearing from the readers and those moments, and beyond just the sexual abuse one. I mean, people connecting and reaching out and saying how, this little piece was what they needed right now. I print them all off. Like I print them and save them on but I keep them all. I take pictures of them because I want to go back through and remember these moments, even when it's past my 2-year newly released published book moment. And I'm, trying to decide what my next move is. I don't ever want to forget these moments and the power of them. I know, right?
Well, since we've been spending this incredible coffee chat talking about harnessing the power of community and engaging with our audiences, now we're going to open this up to the audience. And we do have our first question. So our first question comes from Zara Miller, and she's asking, what is the weirdest question a member of your audience has ever asked you? I gotta know this. I'm very curious now.
This is a hard one to think of on the fly because it's kind of like, what's the most embarrassing story you've tell us your most embarrassing. Colette, you said you were about to say something.
No, I was just going to say that sometimes the discussions that we've had around, the topics of the book and, things that people say together, like in a relatively big group, 24, 25 people, or broken out in little groups even, and then coming together. It surprises me how even a bigger group like that, you can have that kind of intimacy. So I would say just people reveal things about themselves when they really feel comfortable like that in a group. That is very surprising sometimes.
So I, in one of my podcast interviews, I had this amazing interview with a Filipino queer sex therapist based out of Toronto, who specifically wanted to interview me because apparently he and I had the exact same sexual awakening experience that I document and talk about in my book. And not only did he ask me to literally like back and forth, like narrate it. Like we literally like a book reading, like a script reading. I was me, he was my mother, and we went back and forth basically like doing this whole bit. And so that's out there in the world now. And so a couple of weeks later, I was in San Francisco, and then somebody kept asking me because okay, so basically what happened was I had my first kiss with a boy, and then like we ended up going. I confessed in this podcast that I then didn't stop there. I went into the Dodge Caravan of my parents, and like I had a moment in my parents' driveway. So two things happened. Number one, my brother was in the audience saying, wait, didn't we take that Dodge Caravan to church the next day? And I said, yes, we did. Next question. And then number two was somebody was asking, I was like, oh, so I was also in a Dodge Caravan. And suddenly like, everyone was starting to talk about their first sexual experiences and sexual awakenings happening in cars specifically, next to their parents' houses. And that became literally a solid 10 minutes of dialogue in my book reading, which I love that I was able to open space to that level of authenticity. But that definitely was like one of the most like fascinating moments for me so far. Also, by the way, people listen to your podcast interviews. I thought I've done so many of them at this point that I'm just like, who's going to listen to this? Who's ever going to listen to this? I actually have people who now habitually listen to them, and they'll say things. I was, oh, you should have answered this. Oh, you answered this differently. I was like, who is tracking?
Oh, I love that. I don't know if this is the weirdest question, but this is probably the most annoying question. I'm going to rephrase it a little. At my book launch, right? So the soft cover and the ebook have just released. I'm at the initial book launch. There's 250, 300 people there. It is a moment of celebration. And I had, no less than 20 people say, so are you working on your next book? And I thought to myself, I'm not even in the middle. Like, this is just the beginning of the first book. There's so much, right? Hardcover, audio, but people instantly want to know, when's your next book coming out? Like, what are you working on next? And I'm like, no, I said, no, I'm going to enjoy this for a while. I'm going to enjoy this before I start. I've got ideas. I know what I'm going to do, but you're not going to let this moment, like, this is my moment. I'm going to just sit with it.
Any other questions?
Can I be a member of the audience a little bit?
Yes.
I have a quick follow-up question. So I think we've all touched on this a little bit in some of your earlier answers, but in the same vein as your ideal reader sort of evolving, has your ideal engagement strategy evolved? Like, have you found that before you started your book journey, you were mostly on this space, but now you spend most of your time on this space? And how did you, as an author, decide, like, because we all just have limited time. So how did you decide, like, yes, this is my new priority, if there was a new priority?
I'd be happy to jump in and share my thoughts on that initially. I'll tell you, having started off owning a business and working with clients all over, and then moving into more speaking and now becoming an author, it's a pull, right? The business is still full-time, and then I've got all this speaker author stuff beginning to develop. And so for me, it's really sitting down, and I've had to have, it's been hard, but I've been sitting down, giving myself space to create. I know the next step for me is speaker author longer term, and that's where I want this to evolve to. And I know if I don't invest the appropriate amount of time now, more so, so you can't really have both. And so for me, it's about proactively investing that time to see what that next chapter looks like. Because I know if I do, it will unfold the way it needs to. But it is a pull, because then I'm having to say no to some other things on the business, because there's only so much time, right? And you can't do everything really, really well. So it's been an interesting transition. And I find that, again, even just week to week, the more time I pour into the book, author, speaker, whatever it is, whatever that looks like for you out in the audience, the payoffs come in every single week in small ways. They begin to compound, and I'm starting to see them.
I think for me, what was the biggest surprise was the podcast sort of avenue for me. I really just did like one or two at the suggestion of the author coaches, and certainly of John, and what John Saunders was doing with the NDP podcast. And so I took the advice. I signed up for Matchmaker.fm. I also reached out to one or two podcasters, and then that just became a thing. And I really like it. And that has been probably the most interesting sort of and direct way for me to engage with new readers, new audiences. But also realizing that there's such fertile ground there in that space, in that podcasting space. It's also frankly forced me to be very succinct and specific in how I reflect on my stories, how I tell my story, how I tell the story and market the book, which as a marketer is like great for me because it's also honing my own craft in terms of, very, very, quick ways to convey a story, quick ways to convey a point, quick ways to sell, right? Sell me, sell the book. And I've gotten really good at being able to, read the audience, read specifically like the podcast like style, and to be able to adapt in that way, and to realize that there is still a lot for me to learn as a 21 plus year marketing executive. Like it's great for me to always be challenged to figure out different ways that I can market and the different ways that I can manifest content in these different ways. And podcasting was definitely the last place I expected that this journey would take me to. But in terms of like the next steps, I think definitely like taking on those conversations that I had in Southern California and really starting to explore that really wholeheartedly, I think it's definitely my next step. Nicole, same thing. I get asked, when is your next book? When is the next book? So the funny thing is actually when I pitched this book, I did pitch a second one actually with Dr. K as well. And that book is like literally nipping at me. It's saying, start me. I have content. Like I have stories, I have content. Like, and if anything, it's me like wanting to, exactly to your point, enjoy this moment and not just rush to write. Because actually, if anything, I discovered an addiction to this writing thing. Like I really like writing. I'm doing a lot more of it now, both professionally in my day-to-day job, but also just generally, like I really like the art and the science and the craft of writing in a way that I didn't ever anticipate I would appreciate this at this time in my life. So I think that's definitely something I'm going to lean into more, is really discover this new part of myself.
Yeah, I concur with what both of you are saying. Trying to make sure that I get my time in for writing and being able to market, but yet keep up my work. It's a balance. It's a constant balance. But for me, and my husband always teases me about this, I'm always on to the next thing. It's like, and I'm not going to do that with this book because, I want to take it through and grow it, but I have ideas already for my second and third book. So, but that's a challenge because, you have to be able to promote it properly, first write it properly, promote it properly, plus with everything else. So I think it's a major balancing act.
We do happen to have another audience question. This is also from Zara. And this question is, with so many diverse communities engaging with you, what do you do to make sure they all feel heard? Do you answer their emails? Do you book individual times to discuss with them on difficult topics, etc.?
I will say that I definitely have engaged via Instagram. I've done, my share of DMs, but I will say that a lot of people actually have been really, really respectful with like this part of where the journey is. Like they know that I think anytime I said in the last month, I'm on a national book tour, they're like, oh, okay, I'll talk to you in December. So that's been really, really nice. But actually now that I've finished that, I'm now starting to get, some emails and some DMs, saying, oh, I'd love to not engage you in this and this and this. And that's been really cool just to have that kind of engagement. But what I also will say is that I think it's also allowed me to prioritize also, like, I can't talk to everyone, right? In fact, if anything, I'd say that is why we wrote the book, is so that becomes like, you want to know what I think on something? That. And honestly, as somebody who has been a consultant, I've been a management consultant and a speaker consultant for a really long time. If nothing else, I wrote something that is now like a tangible manifestation of what I think about it. Like when people ask me, oh, what do you think about this? That's what I think about it. And so it's been a great way. It's been a great shortcut, if nothing else, to say to people, this is how I it's almost to the point where it's like, if you really want to engage in me, you've got to engage the book. Like I think we pour so much of our souls into this, is that if you really want to engage, like it can't just be like a random walk up. Like you've got to know something about the book. You've got to have at least read a review, at least read like the synopsis, know something about it. And then we can have a much deeper conversation, because then I don't feel I'm like overly repeating myself. Because I felt like that towards the end of the book tour, I was kind of like, oh wow, this is the second, fourth, 7,000th time I've said this. But actually, by the end of the book, I had started to engage with people who had actually read the book, especially in the first couple passes, especially during the when I had sat down at the test readers. Some of my test readers were there, and then we were able to really, really engage in a really deep, meaningful dialogue about the stories, about the themes, about the concepts. And so for me, I think it's about prioritizing where I want to spend those kinds of engagements, where if I'm going to have my time to engage, I'm going to engage on, I think, a deeper level, like about the book, about the themes, because I feel like I owe it to myself to have that sort of where I invest my time. In terms of booking individual times, so what I've actually started doing is, and this may be like a piece of advice for those out there. So I've been donating my books to fundraisers, galas, virtual and in person. And with the book, the signed book, I also offer a 30-minute coffee chat, 30 minutes to an hour talk. And 4 organizations have taken me up on that. And so I'm actually shipping my book off to a couple of nonprofits right now. And it's gala season, it's fundraiser season. So it's been very fertile ground for me. So, and it's great because then I can have individual or even organizational time with new organizations. But those are dedicated, right? It's dedicated, it's planned for. I have a program, I have bullet points, like it's dedicated. And so I like that. I like being able to structure it, especially at this point in my author journey, is structuring it and making it very, very intentional.
Yeah, I would agree with what Michael's saying on that one. And I think it's easy to get sucked into the fan base of people who are like the super fans, or the people, especially people who have always wanted to write a book, but they're not writing a book, and they want to tell you about it. And so I kind of take those and I go, oh, let me introduce you to Creators Institute. This would be a great program for you to go through. And I try to do that. And I think you have to be boundaries. I think boundaries are really, really important in this. Otherwise, you could be on the phone or on Zoom calls all day talking with individuals so I like how Michael's talking about like, hey, I package it up. And I do think, especially I'm a certified master coach, I am trying to put them into the funnel that way. So if they really want to do some work and do some deep work, then let's go about it that way. But I do think boundaries are important. Otherwise, you can get sucked into, and your time would get hijacked pretty significantly.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for such wonderful answers to our questions. And thank you to the audience members for asking such thoughtful questions as well. My final question to you is, do you have any parting words for the audience members watching live and watching later?
Hang in there. It's worth it. You're going to be thrilled when you come to the point of where we're at. It's great.
And I think it's for me, it's you're touching people, whether you know it or not. You are touching you're touching somebody out there who needs to read your story, hear your words, and I think rest with that, and also celebrate that, right? That you have created something, you put it out in the world, and somewhere out there, it's going to heal someone, it's going to affect them, it's going to impact them in ways you never anticipated, and that's something really powerful that I think we should all be very proud of.
Michael took mine, so I'm going to go a different direction. Because that was brilliant. You're exactly right. You have no idea. Lean into this circle, lean into the, Creators Institute, and lean into this group to help get through it. Because I'll tell you, there were so many moments that I was telling myself I can't, or I'm tired, or it's not good enough. And this circle really came through for me and helped push me to the finish line. So that was so beneficial.
Lean into your community. That's great advice. I want to thank our lovely panelists once again for taking the time out of their day to meet with us and to give such great advice. And for those watching, if there's something that you'd like to learn more about, if you're an author, aspiring author, a writer, a person who likes to read things, what do you want to learn more about? Suggest it in the comments. You know where to find us down below in the description, all of Instagrams for all the author coaches, and our email. So all the things, and I'll toss this up here again for you. I'm Mackenzie Finkley.
I'm Kyra Ann Dawkins.
And this is Coffee Chats. Join us next week when we will be talking about public speaking and booking gigs. I'm really excited for that one. We got a little teaser taste of it from Michael, but we will have 4 panelists next week talking to us about that in particular. All very exciting. So with that, that's it for today.
Bye.